Good afternoon. So John and I are really glad that we're here to talk about security and how it's affected when putting our precious data into the cloud. For those out there that know me, my name is AJ Forysiak. I do capture here at Varonis for the Department of Defense. And I spent about 27 years inside the DoD as a military intelligence officer and senior government executive in both intel and cyber. I love to talk about cyber issues affecting not only the DoD, but the federal and commercial space as well. John, why don't you share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, AJ. I've been in the industry now a little over a decade, give or take, doing various roles, supporting the federal government the entire time. The last 4 years, more specifically, I've been now at Varonis here as a DoD Solutions Engineer. So, like AJ was kind of talking, we're going to be talking about data, in this little talk here. Specifically, though, sensitive data in the cloud, right? Like repositories, uploaded files, databases, anywhere that critical information might live outside the confines of an on-premise data center that you might manage. And more particularly, we want to discuss whether or not that kind of data living in either location is quote-unquote safe.
So some of you may know I'm an active blogger. I put a lot of information out there on LinkedIn and other places. So recently, I put out a LinkedIn post talking about this exact topic that John just introduced. So what prompted me to write about this is the overwhelming mass movement of data into the cloud without any real thought given to the risks of this move. In the post, I went into detail about 3 perils that you should be concerned about when putting all of your data into the cloud.
Yeah, given how so many agencies, both DoD and civilian, are moving to various cloud environments, AWS, Azure, 365, as well as using more and more SaaS-based products, we thought the subject was worth diving into today. So let's start this off by talking about some of the lore or the promise of keeping data in the cloud. Things like overhead, maintenance, cost, as well as native integrations for security.
Yeah, great, John. So less overhead. So by just moving your data into the cloud, you reduce the cost of maintaining your own infrastructure because now it's provided as a service. No boxes to maintain or servers to patch. This is provided by the cloud provider. So you can lessen the cost of that person. You can actually eliminate it. Also, you don't need to have those large server rooms with all of that swap. So space, weight, air conditioning, and power to worry about.
Yeah, I mean, aside from administratively managing the configurations around the data, it's like you were saying, right? There is less overhead. You don't have the requirement to manage any of those bare metal boxes, right? Racks of gear or the storage arrays in a data center, along with the power and the cooling, all that requires. You buy a package for your appliance or for your application or your service, your repository, etc., and you just set it up. Any upgrades are done by those that manage the underlying platform, right? If something breaks, you open a ticket with the platform support, and there's a whole lot less headache.
So now the famous lure of cost. All the cloud providers press the idea that this will cost less in the long run. There's no need for a 5-year life cycle replacement, and everything is built into a low cost. You only pay for what you need. That is the model. It's modeled after the IO and per terabyte of data that is moved. You no longer need to pay and replace dead drives. This model pays for all that in a monthly use fee. So when following these models, which account for sustainment and procurement, in a majority of cases, it ends up being cheaper.
Yeah, for sure. Of course, all these platforms will come with their own bells and whistles on how to protect your data too, right? So when we're talking about native security solutions, well, they all have them. AWS and Azure have their suite of tools, as does G Suite. Salesforce has Shield. M365 has Purview and Sentinel and Defender, of course. Things are promised to be simpler when it comes to security, because with each respective platform for managing your data, you get a slew of integrated tools for securing it. So it sounds great, right? Sounds great until you look a little deeper and realize that most of those security solutions are still primarily focused on the perimeter and less on the data itself.
As we may all know, cloud providers are pushing the idea more and more each day about moving your data and rely solely on the cloud for all of your services and storage needs. I don't think a day passes where we hear about another security breach with one of the companies that leverages these large cloud providers. I mean, these are daily headlines. Just recently, Okta and Cloudflare had a massive security breach, and all they had to do was compromise some user credentials, and they had the key to the kingdom. You could pull up any literature from AWS and Azure, and they highlight the increased level of security because of the cloud. Let's face it, these cloud providers care about the security of their cloud, their infrastructure, but they're not concerned about the security of your data. It is no different when companies own their own infrastructure and they just built higher walls and larger moats to protect their infrastructure. They did this in the form of firewalls and endpoint devices. As more companies move to the cloud and off their own infrastructure, it does provide a larger trove of data for nefarious actors to target. It just becomes a numbers game.
Yeah, like AJ was just saying, protecting the perimeter and the perimeter alone is a legacy mindset that simply does not work anymore. If an attacker wants access to the network, they're going to find a way to get in. And at the end of the day, the goal is almost always some kind of sensitive data exfiltration. So with these native security tools, you tend to get a lot of perimeter, and you may get some data loss prevention tool with the suite, like what comes with the E5 licensing and Purview with M365, for example, right? But even this is focused on the endpoints and the perimeter still. Traditional DLP does not take into consideration whether or not a user was meant to touch a file. It only attempts to prevent that file from leaving the user's hands. And by the way, it often accomplishes this via a persistent tag or a label on the file that was typically applied by the user themselves, which may or may not be accurate, right? In fact, we've seen too often that a user may change a label on the document in order to collaborate with individuals more easily, even if it means violating organizational policies.
Let's now shift our attention for a minute to data ownership and control. I think most companies don't think about this topic until it's too late. When you move your data over to the cloud, you no longer own the infrastructure like you've had so for many years. When you owned your infrastructure, you physically knew where the servers were. You fully understood the routing, and you controlled the access. When giving up this type of control, the implications of this can be severe. So do your homework. This is easily showcased when you get into compliance challenges with something like GDPR. Under those regulations, the data must reside in the European Union. And if the data leaves the EU, you are then potentially liable for fines and penalties. It's important to look at those terms in your agreements that many organizations just blindly sign. Do your homework. It's that simple.
Yeah. Well, cloud platforms, as a general rule, are designed to facilitate the sharing of data among team members as needed, right? I picked on M365 a bit earlier, but this is the case with so many, from 365 to G Suite to Confluence or Slack or even Salesforce. The purpose here isn't actually to lock down any data, technically, rather make it easier for folks to get access to things.
I'm now going to talk a little bit about access rights and control from IT to the users. The idea of moving access rights from the IT staff to the users is a necessary move. In zero trust environments, there's no better person to grant access than the data owners. I know for some organizations and traditional IT staff, this may be a thought of heresy. To make this a reality, organizations must adopt data stewards. As I move around organizations literally around the world, they're keen to the idea, but the IT staff is holding on with a kung fu grip of this function. I just don't get it.
No, absolutely, AJ. We no longer have a sense of true ownership here. When so much data is willingly or even unintentionally shared to others, The audit trail to determine who owns what or who shared what becomes incredibly difficult to follow. In order to properly protect your data, regardless where it resides, you're going to need visibility and analytics for 3 distinct parallels in your environment: sensitivity, permissions, and activity. Organizations need to stop assuming that users can properly classify and label documents, and this process needs to be automated. An agency should be able to easily report on exactly where their sensitive or critical information is on the network. IT administrators also need to be able to keep up with permissions. In an ever collaborative culture today, this is becoming more and more difficult, like AJ was talking about, but not impossible. And these permissions need to automatically map back to the level of sensitivity on that data. You need to know who can touch sensitive documents. But knowing who can touch them isn't enough. You need to track audit activity for every single user in the environment. And with this type of activity coupled with knowing where users have access, an analytical layer can be applied for user behavior understanding. Take automated action on where to clean up overexposed sensitive data, detect anomalous activity because a user is touching files they don't typically touch. Once all of this is in place, then traditional DLP or other perimeter-focused data protection can do its job more easily. For one, the labels were automatically and accurately applied, so DLP policies can actually be enforced without the concern of users not getting access where they need it. Least privilege can be adhered to because your audit trails allow IT admins to know the data owners and allow just those owners to regularly govern access to repositories. All the while, automated permission remediation is still happening in the background to clean up whatever mess collaboration is causing in your cloud platform of choice. This is true data security. Whether your data is on-prem, in the cloud, or in some hybrid environment. Without this kind of 3-prong approach, organizations are going to continue struggling to properly secure that sensitive data.
As John just laid out for us, there must be a new way for you to operate in this cloud world. As we lost many of the controls we've embraced in the on-premise world, we must shift our focus on how we secure our data in the cloud. The idea of blindly moving your data into the cloud without understanding the risks and implications is just reckless. Doing your homework, embracing the idea of data owners, and empowering automation to solve the simple tasks is the only way to survive in these complex, hybrid, and full cloud environments. Thank you for participating in this conversation today, and please reach out to us for questions. Our information is posted below and will be available at the end of the recording. Thank you and have a great day.